rooftop was strung with golden lights, the city skyline shimmering like a backdrop stolen from a dream. Ethan's voice trembled only slightly as he lowered himself onto one knee, the velvet box open in his hand. Around them, cheers erupted, champagne glasses clinked, and phones lifted to capture the moment. Within minutes, strangers across the city, and soon the internet, would be watching, liking, and sharing the video of a young lawyer proposing to the daughter of one of the state's most powerful families. On the surface, it was picture perfect, a fairy tale proposal with the kind of cinematic flair most people only fantasize about. Yet beneath the laughter and applause, a strange stiffness lingered, most noticeably in the way Lily's father, Charles, forced his smile, and how Ethan's mother, Diane, clapped with polite precision instead of true joy. The centerpiece of this spectacle wasn't only Ethan's heartfelt words or Lily's tearful nod. It was the ring, a diamond of staggering size and history, glowing under the rooftop lights, carrying with it a legacy that no one in the crowd could ignore. To the world online, it was romance incarnate. To the two families, it was the revival of old wounds long thought buried. As the night unfolded, the rooftop celebration revealed its fractures. Laughter sounded a little too sharp, toasts ran a little too long, and every gesture seemed loaded with meaning. When Diane leaned close to Charles, her voice was low, but her words sliced through the air like glass. That ring was never meant for your daughter's finger. It was not the kind of remark guests were supposed to hear, but the tension rippled outward like an electric current. Whispers started, and soon eyes darted between the two families, measuring the stiffness in their postures, the unspoken hostility. What was meant to be a union looked, in that moment, like a chess move, a declaration of battle dressed up as celebration. Ethan, still buoyed by the adrenaline of his proposal, noticed little beyond the cameras flashing and Lily's hand trembling in his own. But Lily felt the atmosphere shift. She caught the way her father's jaw tightened, and her mother's hand gripped her wine glass until her knuckles whitened. She saw Ethan's mother's cool detachment, as though she were witnessing a crime scene instead of an engagement party. The party was not about love anymore. It was about territory, history, and grudges resurrected by the gleam of a diamond. Later, away from the clinking glasses and the chatter of guests, trying to pretend nothing was wrong, Lily found herself staring at the ring glittering on her finger. It was supposed to represent joy, a future she and Ethan were choosing together, but instead, it felt like a shackle. The weight of it pressed harder than gold and stone. It carried whispers of betrayal, of bitterness passed down through generations, of secrets she had never been told in full. Ethan, lost in the glow of their viral fame, didn't yet understand that his love had tied him to more than just her. It had bound him to a legacy of rivalry, politics, and wounds, carved long before either of them was born. Alone with her thoughts, Lily touched the diamond as though it might burn her skin. Why does it feel like a curse instead of a promise? She whispered, the words trembling out of her, half confession, half warning. That line, soft and private, was not captured by any phone camera, not broadcast online. Yet it was the truth at the core of their story. The world celebrated a fairy tale, but Lily already sensed that beneath the sparkle of the ring lay something darker, something that might one day demand a price neither of them was ready to pay. Ethan's life had never been simple. Raised by Diane, a single mother who sacrificed more than anyone ever knew, he grew up watching her juggle late-night jobs and early morning responsibilities. Her hands always tired, but her spirit never truly broken. His father had abandoned them before Ethan was old enough to even remember his face, leaving only a trail of unpaid bills and unspoken bitterness. The absence of a father forced Ethan to grow up fast, to shape himself into the man he believed his mother deserved at his side. Through discipline and grit, he climbed his way through school, through law programs that others in his neighborhood never dared to dream of, carving out a career that could not be dismissed. Yet, beneath the confidence he projected in polished suits and courtrooms, there lingered a hunger that went deeper than ambition, a yearning for stability, for belonging, for the kind of home that didn't vanish when the bills came due. Meeting Lily felt like destiny to him, a chance not only at love, but at being welcomed into something larger, a family name that commanded respect. He thought of it as validation, proof that the struggles of his past were not in vain. But what Ethan could not see yet was that the very family he wanted so desperately to join had no interest in accepting him on his own terms. To them, he was still the boy from the wrong side of the tracks, a reminder of old wounds they preferred to keep buried. Lily, by contrast, had never wanted for food, shelter, or education. Her childhood home was a sprawling estate, where marble floors echoed with silence, where every corner gleamed with wealth but offered little warmth. Charles, her father, was a man carved out of steel ambition, commanding, calculating, always grooming Lily to carry forward the family's name as though her dreams were merely secondary details to be dismissed. Her mother, Margaret, played the quieter role, smoothing edges, curating appearances, ensuring the family's public image remained untarnished. To the world, they were the picture of perfection. But Lily knew the truth. Their family was a dynasty built not on love, but on control, power, and manipulation. She longed for escape, not in the reckless sense of running away, but in the deeper yearning of building something real, something warm and genuine, a life that wasn't scripted by her father's expectations. Yet guilt tethered her like invisible chains. Every time she thought about stepping away, she felt the weight of her family's sacrifices, their demands, their insistence that loyalty to the name was her highest duty. Loving Ethan was her act of rebellion, but it was also her greatest fear. She knew her father would never accept him, not because of who Ethan was, but because of what his presence threatened. The fragile control Charles maintained over the family narrative. Lily stood between two worlds, the cold dynasty she was born into, and the fragile, tender future she dreamed of with Ethan. And she was beginning to realize that choosing love meant declaring war on her own blood. The diamond ring, dazzling, radiant, seemingly eternal, was more than just a piece of jewelry. To the guests at the engagement party, it was a symbol of wealth, tradition, and grandeur. But in hushed whispers, its true history resurfaced. Decades earlier, it had belonged to Diane, Ethan's mother, back when Charles's younger brother had courted her with promises of marriage and loyalty. That love story had collapsed into betrayal when he cast Diane aside, choosing wealth and political alliance over her. The fallout destroyed her reputation, leaving her to raise Ethan alone under the shadow of disgrace. That same ring, meant to symbolize devotion, became a relic of betrayal, passed down in silence until it reappeared on Lily's hand. Ethan had unknowingly resurrected the past by offering it to the woman he loved, believing it to be a token of union. For Diane, the sight of that ring was a knife reopened. For Charles, it was a reminder of scandal he wanted forgotten. And for Lily, it became a symbol of the impossible stakes between them. Ethan's struggle was clear: to prove himself worthy of Lily's family, not realizing that the game was rigged against him from the start. Lily's mission, meanwhile, was to shield Ethan from her family's cruel power plays, to prevent history from swallowing him as it had nearly swallowed Diane. Together, their love faced a brutal question. Could two hearts carve out a new future when the ring binding them was forged in betrayal? It was no longer just about romance. It was about rewriting a story that had scarred generations and deciding whether their bond was strong enough to withstand the war their families would never stop waging. The dining room was a theater of control, a long mahogany table gleaming under chandeliers, crystal glasses lined with military precision, and servants hovering silently in the background. What was supposed to be a celebratory family dinner for the newly engaged couple quickly shifted into an interrogation. Charles presided over the table like a judge, his voice carrying the authority of a man used to bending people to his will. At first, the conversation tiptoed around politics, philanthropy, and family achievements. But beneath the veneer of civility, a current of disdain ran sharp. Finally, Charles turned to Ethan with a cold smile that cut deeper than open hostility. You do realize, don't you, that you're nothing more than a charity case wearing our name? His words echoed in the silence that followed, a deliberate strike meant to reduce Ethan to the boy from the wrong side of town. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he did not shrink. He responded with quiet strength, declaring his love for Lily and his intention to stand by her regardless of wealth or status. For a moment, his defiance flickered like a torch against the suffocating air. But then, Margaret, usually the silent diplomat, broke her composure. Her voice, brittle with years of restraint, rang across the table. That ring destroyed this family once. It will destroy it again. The room froze, the words hanging like smoke after a gunshot. Suddenly, the glittering diamond on Lily's hand wasn't a token of love. It was a loaded weapon. The dinner collapsed into chaos. Diane, who had sat in strained silence, abruptly rose from her chair, her face pale, her eyes burning with the ghosts of a past she had fought so hard to bury. She stormed out before anyone could stop her, leaving behind a trail of shocked whispers and unanswered questions. Ethan, torn between rage and confusion, left the table as well, chasing after his mother. When he finally confronted her, the truth came pouring out, not as a neat confession, but as jagged fragments of memory and pain. Years ago, Charles's younger brother had courted her, placing that very same diamond ring on her finger, promising her a life together. But ambition had poisoned him. He had abandoned her for wealth, leaving Diane to endure shame and humiliation, branded as a foolish girl who had believed in love. The betrayal had not only scarred her, but also etched her into the margins of society, forcing her to raise Ethan alone under the heavy shadow of scandal. Now, fate had twisted cruelly. The ring that symbolized her ruin had returned, resting on the hand of the woman Ethan loved. Hearing this, Ethan's world tilted. What he had thought was a fresh beginning suddenly felt like a cruel joke, orchestrated by history itself. The glitter of the diamond mocked him, its beauty masking the rot it carried within. Back at the mansion, Lily found Ethan standing apart, the glow of the chandeliers doing nothing to soften the storm on his face. She reached for him, desperation threading her voice, as she begged him not to let her family's sins destroy what they had. Her eyes shimmered with fear, not of losing status, but of losing the one piece of real happiness she had ever chosen for herself. Ethan listened, torn between the tenderness he felt for her and the fury boiling inside him. The ring, once a promise, had become a battlefield, a reminder that their love was shackled to decades of betrayal and bitterness. To stay with Lily now meant wading directly into a feud where he was already cast as the enemy, where his mother's scars and Charles's venom left no neutral ground. The decision was no longer simple, no longer about romance. It was about survival, loyalty, and whether love could truly rewrite the past. For the first time since he had knelt before her with trembling hands and hopeful eyes, Ethan looked at Lily, not just as the woman he adored, but as the daughter of the family that had shattered his mother's life. The question was no longer, "Do you love me?" but "Can love survive this war?" And as the night stretched on, both of them knew the answer would shape their lives forever. The engagement, once celebrated as a romantic spectacle, began to sour under the relentless gaze of the public. Blogs and tabloids seized on the viral proposal video, spinning it into a narrative dripping with scandal. The ring, in particular, became the centerpiece of fascination, nicknamed online as the Cursed Diamond. Anonymous whispers about its dark history surfaced, amplified by gossip columns that thrived on speculation. Headlines painted Ethan as the ambitious outsider, and Lily as the heiress trapped in a doomed fairy tale. Behind closed doors, Charles weaponized this narrative. He called Lily into his study, where the shelves of law books and family portraits loomed like silent witnesses to his authority. With a voice as cold as the polished oak desk between them, he pressured her to end the engagement. He dangled promises of financial freedom and independence, tempting her with the illusion of control, but only if she severed ties with Ethan. Meanwhile, Diane confronted Ethan in the small apartment they still shared. Her warning was not loud but heavy, weighted with the bitterness of memory. "They'll take everything from you," she whispered, her eyes fierce. "Just like they took everything from me." To Ethan, it sounded less like advice and more like a prophecy. The war wasn't just brewing, it was spilling into every corner of their lives. As the pressure mounted, cracks appeared in Ethan and Lily's once unshakable bond. Ethan, already haunted by his mother's pain, began to look at Lily not only as his fiancée, but also as the daughter of the man who despised him. Every visit to her family's estate, every whisper of scandal online, deepened his resentment. Lily, on the other hand, found herself trapped in an impossible cage. Her father's words pressed down on her with suffocating force, and Ethan's growing anger only tightened the bars. Nights that had once been filled with quiet laughter and shared dreams now dissolved into arguments. Ethan accused her of siding with her father whenever she hesitated, and Lily snapped under the weight of being pulled in two directions. She loved Ethan with everything she had, but she couldn't ignore that his determination to fight Charles sometimes came at the cost of their peace. What had started as a fairy tale love story now felt like a battlefield where both of them were soldiers, bruised and weary. The intimacy between them, once effortless, now carried tension so sharp that even silence felt dangerous. Each touch, each glance, seemed to carry the question neither dared to ask aloud: "Are we strong enough to survive this?" In the shadows of this escalating war, Charles played his most insidious move. He invited Diane to the estate under the pretense of civility, though the polished tea set and polite smiles were little more than masks. Sliding an envelope across the table, he offered her money, hush money, to persuade Ethan to walk away before things grew uglier. It was a calculated insult, reducing her son's love to something negotiable, a transaction like every other deal Charles had made in his climb to power. Diane's hands trembled as she pushed the envelope back, her voice steady even as her heart ached. "You can't buy me, Charles. Not then. Not now." Her refusal was an act of defiance, but it came with a warning when she returned to Ethan. She told him the truth, her words edged with desperation. "You're walking into a trap. Every step you take closer to Lily's family, the ground beneath you becomes less yours." Ethan heard her, but his pride bristled. He was determined not to be chased away, not to surrender to Charles's cruelty. Yet the weight of his mother's warning lingered, threading through every decision he made. The war was no longer only about love. It was about survival against a man who viewed people as pawns and believed that history, like rings and curses, could be used to destroy. Despite the relentless gossip, the poisonous whispers, and the mounting pressure, Ethan and Lily made the choice that stunned everyone. They would marry. Their announcement, delivered with trembling voices but steady eyes, was an act of rebellion, a declaration that their love mattered more than their family's grudges. For a brief moment, the world seemed to bend toward them. Friends cheered, strangers online applauded their defiance, and even Ethan dared to believe that perhaps love could outlast history. But Charles was not a man to be outmaneuvered. On the day of the wedding rehearsal, the church pews filled with watchful eyes, the stained glass windows casting fractured colors over polished aisles. Ethan stood tall beside Lily, clutching her hand, when Charles strode forward, his presence commanding silence like a storm cloud blotting out the sun. In his hand were papers, documents, contracts, evidence sharpened into a weapon. With a venomous precision, he declared that Ethan's absent father, the ghost who had haunted Ethan's life, had once been his trusted business partner. Worse, he accused Ethan of carrying not only the man's blood, but also his betrayal. The very betrayal that had led to Diane's ruin. Gasps echoed through the church, a chorus of scandal. Ethan's world cracked. The man he had long cursed in silence, the man he had vowed never to become, was being dragged into the light as the missing piece of the feud. And in that revelation, Charles tried to twist Ethan into an enemy of his own story. The air in the church turned heavy, as though grief itself had taken physical form. Ethan stood frozen, humiliated, his chest burning with the weight of secrets he never asked to inherit. Lily's grip faltered, her heart ripping between the man she loved and the father who wielded lies as easily as swords. And then came the final collapse. Diane, unable to hold back the truth any longer, broke down in front of them all. Tears streaked her face as she confessed that Ethan's father had not abandoned her because of weakness or indifference, but because Charles had orchestrated the lies that drove him away. Charles had poisoned her love, her reputation, her chance at a family, until all that remained was shame. The revelation landed like a blade, cutting through decades of silence. Ethan's heart split, not just from rage at Charles, but from grief for the life his mother had been denied. And in that unbearable silence, Lily ripped the ring from her finger. Her scream shattered the sanctity of the church. This ring doesn't symbolize love, it's a weapon. The diamond clattered onto the marble floor, echoing like gunfire. Guests flinched, whispers spiraling into chaos. But nothing could mask the truth. The symbol that had brought them together had also destroyed them. The fallout was instant and devastating. The two families, already fragile under the weight of their grudges, finally imploded in public view. Years of bitterness, manipulation, and whispered betrayals came roaring to the surface, tearing away any pretense of civility. Margaret tried to pull Charles back, but her polished composure cracked, exposing decades of complicity. Diane, trembling and broken, could not stop sobbing, her pain raw in a way that silenced even the most curious onlookers. And in the middle of it all, Ethan and Lily stood on opposite ends of the battlefield, their love strangled by the sins of those who came before them. Ethan's eyes burned with betrayal, not from Lily, but from the cruel fate that had dragged his father's shadow into their story. Lily's tears streaked her face as she realized that choosing Ethan meant carrying scars that might never heal. The ring lay abandoned between them, no longer a symbol of promise but a monument to everything that had gone wrong. Their relationship, once a beacon of hope against family hatred, crumbled under the pressure. For the first time, neither of them reached for the other. The silence between them spoke louder than any vow could. Love, no matter how fierce, could not survive when bound in chains of lies, betrayal, and generational war. The climax was not just the end of an engagement. It was the death of a dream that had once dared to challenge history. Months passed, and the chaos of the failed wedding became yesterday's scandal, replaced by newer stories in the tabloids. Yet for Ethan, Lily, and Diane, the scars remained, though they had begun to transform into something stronger. Ethan buried himself in his work, pouring his energy into the law with the precision of a man determined to carve his own future. No longer chasing Charles's approval or Lily's family name, he built cases brick by brick, slowly earning the respect of colleagues who once dismissed him as an outsider. The court became his sanctuary, not a battlefield against Lily's father, but against injustice itself. Meanwhile, Lily stepped away from the cold marble halls of her childhood estate and into a modest apartment of her own. The space was small but alive with color, warmth, and choice. For the first time, she made decisions without her father's voice dictating them. Whether it was the furniture she bought, the art she hung on the walls, or the silence she chose at night, the estrangement from Charles left an ache, but it also left her with freedom she had never known. Diane, too, found a slow healing, no longer defined by the betrayal that had scarred her youth. She rediscovered small joys, gardening, reading novels, walking through the park without the weight of shame pressing down her spine. Each of them, in their separate spaces, had stepped out of the shadows of the ring, beginning to claim lives of their own. One quiet morning, Lily sat at her small kitchen table, sunlight spilling over the envelope in front of her. Inside lay the diamond ring, its brilliance unchanged but its meaning transformed. She held it one last time, feeling both the ache of what it had cost her and the strength of what she had gained. With steady hands, she slipped it into a padded box, addressed to a women's shelter across the city. Alongside it, she tucked a note written in careful, deliberate script. May this never be someone else's cage. It wasn't an act of bitterness, it was an offering, a choice to turn something that once symbolized betrayal into a beacon of possibility for someone else. As the box left her hands at the post office counter, Lily felt lighter, as if she had finally severed the last chain, binding her to her father's dynasty. At the same time, Ethan sat in his office, unaware of Lily's gesture, staring at a letter that would change his trajectory. A prestigious firm had offered him his biggest case yet, a chance to lead a lawsuit against none other than Charles's company, exposing corruption that had long been whispered about, but never proven. The irony was not lost on him. The man who once belittled him as a charity case now stood on the other side of Ethan's courtroom strategy. For the first time, Ethan didn't feel like the boy clawing for respect. He felt like a man standing on equal ground, ready to confront the giant who had cast shadows over his life. The power had shifted, though none of them had planned it this way. Ethan, Diane, and Lily no longer lived as pawns in Charles's carefully curated world. They had stepped outside of it, rewriting their own narratives. Diane, watching her son rise in his career, felt a pride she had never dared to hope for. The shame of her past no longer defined her. Instead, she became a symbol of resilience, a woman who had survived betrayal and raised a man strong enough to stand against the machine that once crushed her. Lily, alone but freer than she had ever been, no longer measured her worth through her family's name, but through her own choices, and Ethan, no longer humiliated or bound by Charles's disdain, had become something greater than a victim. He was now a force capable of dismantling the very empire that tried to destroy him. The cursed ring was gone, its legacy buried not by silence but by transformation. What remained was not the ruin of love, but the empowerment that came from surviving its collapse. Ethan and Lily's romance had not endured, but in its ashes both had found themselves. And as Ethan prepared to face Charles across a courtroom, he knew this wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, for his mother, for himself, and perhaps, in some unspoken way, for Lily too. The story had begun with a ring that chained them to the past, but it ended with the choice to forge a future unbound, where love and dignity were no longer dictated by power, but reclaimed by courage. The cafe was unremarkable, small, tucked on the corner of a quiet street, filled with the hum of conversation and the clink of cups. Yet it became the stage for a final encounter neither Ethan nor Lily had planned. Ethan had stopped there between meetings, his suit jacket folded neatly beside him, his files stacked on the table like the armor of his new life. Lily walked in moments later, her hair loose, her steps lighter than he remembered. Time had softened them both, reshaping their pain into something quieter, less jagged. Their eyes met across the room, and for a heartbeat, it was as if nothing had changed. Two people still tethered by memories of love, loss, and survival. She approached, and he stood, offering a smile that was gentle, not bitter. They sat across from one another, two cups steaming between them, silence filling the spaces words couldn't. It wasn't awkward, nor was it romantic. It was simply human, two souls acknowledging what they had endured, together and apart. For a while, they spoke of ordinary things. Her new apartment, his latest case, the little ways life had carried them forward. There was no accusation in their tones, no lingering resentment, just the soft cadence of two people who had once meant everything to each other. Finally, Lily's voice quieted, her hand curling around her coffee cup. "We couldn't save us," she said, her eyes steady but glistening. "But we saved ourselves." The words hung between them, tender and true. Ethan looked at her, his chest tightening with the ache of recognition. He had fought so long to prove himself, to resist Charles, to hold on to her. And yet, in the end, it was this freedom, this survival, that mattered most. He nodded, his voice low, steady. "And maybe that's enough." There was no need for promises, no need for apologies. They had already given each other what mattered, the strength to walk away from cages, to carve lives of their own. The love that had once bound them had not been wasted. It had been transformed into the very fire that allowed them to survive. When Lily rose to leave, the sunlight spilled across the cafe floor, haloing her in gold. She smiled, not the forced smile of engagement parties or the fragile smile of battles fought, but something freer, something entirely her own. Ethan watched her walk toward the door, his gaze following without clinging. For the first time, he felt no bitterness, no desperate ache, only acceptance. She stepped into the sunlight, disappearing into the world beyond, her silhouette swallowed by the brightness of the day. Ethan remained seated, his hand resting beside the empty coffee cup, his reflection faint in the glass, a man no longer bound by the shadows of the past. On the table, the sunlight caught the rim of the cup, a faint sparkle reminiscent of the cursed ring. Only now it was harmless, a shimmer with no weight, no chains. The camera lingered there on the quiet aftermath. No music swelling, no dramatic gesture, just stillness. A love story had ended, but two lives had begun anew, and sometimes that was enough.